Sangye chodan soki chonam la chanchu padu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chonyen gi pesonam ki drola pencher sangye dropa sho. Sangye chodan soki chonam la chanchu padu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chonyen gi pesonam ki drola pencher sangye dropa sho. Sangye chodan soki chonam la chanchu padu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chunyen gi pe sonam ki drola penche sangye dropa sho.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, so let's just do a couple of minutes meditation on the breath. So although it's included in the prayers we just did, let's just again generate bodhicitta motivation for this morning's session, for the day, for the rest of our lives. I think, the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings from suffering to enlightenment. In order to do that, first I have to reach enlightenment myself. reaching enlightenment depends upon studying, practicing, realizing the entire path to enlightenment. So in order to do that, I'm going to study Atisha's text, the first Lamrim text, first stages of the path text, Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, referring to commentaries by Kuno Lama Rinpoche, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and Geshe Sonam Rinchen. So we're studying these teachings in order to reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So I think this is His Holiness's commentary contained in this book, Illuminating the Path to Enlightenment. And Kuno Lama Rinpoche's commentary is found in this book and online in Teachings from Tibet. And Geshe Sonam Rinchen's is in this book, Atisha's Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. So, these are really three books that would be great to have in your Dharma library or on your tablet or wherever you have your Dharma books. So the first verse, we looked at the opening verse of Atisha's text last time, where he says, homage to the Bodhisattva, the youthful Manjushri. I think that's, I saw that that wasn't in Atisha's original text necessarily. It was, there was a homage put in by the Tibetan translators. I pay homage with great respect to the conquerors of the three times, to their teaching and those who aspire to virtue, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Urged by the good disciple Changchub. So we've been through the story of how Atisha was invited to Tibet. I shall illuminate the lamp for the path to enlightenment. So that's the opening verse, and then we were looking at His Holiness's commentary on that. And so I skipped an important, somehow I jumped an important paragraph just towards the end, where His Holiness was speaking about afflictions of the mind and flawed ways of perceiving and relating to the world. And His Holiness said the Buddhist texts speak of four principal wrong views. So these four are quite well known. I'm sure you all know them. The false view of perceiving impermanent phenomena as permanent. So I think, although all phenomena are impermanent, we see them as permanent. The false view of perceiving events, our own existence, and the various aggregates as desirable when they are not. The false view of perceiving suffering experiences as happiness. And the false view of perceiving our own existence and the world as self-existent and independent when they are utterly devoid of self-existence and independence. So then, in order to counteract these false views, we need to cultivate all the various elements of the path. So this is why there's a need for completeness. So His Holiness was talking about the need for a path to be complete and to be in the right order. The teachings and the practices we do should be done in the right order. So I just want to fill in that little gap. Sure nobody noticed. Deborah noticed?
I just want to put page is that on of the text that you're...
Of this?
Yeah, what page is that?
24.
Okay, thank you. I'll look at it more closely later.
So although Atisha doesn't explicitly have a verse relating to Guru devotion and so forth, His Holiness as I've said, this book is His Holiness's commentary on two texts, Atisha's Lamp for the Path and Lama Tsongkhapa's lines, or Songs of Experience, spiritual experience. So in songs, which I'm not going to really refer much to songs of spiritual experience, otherwise we'll never finish. But well, we may never finish anyway. But there's a verse there, verse 8 says, although there's much merit to be gained from reciting or hearing even once this manner of text written by Atisha, so although there's much merit to be gained from reciting or hearing even once this Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, that includes the essential points of all scriptural pronouncements, you are certain to amass even greater waves of beneficial collections from actually teaching and studying the sacred Dharma contained therein. Therefore, you should consider the points for doing this properly. So then His Holiness says, Lama Tsongkhapa's lines of experience. So this is page 47, if you're following along with His Holiness's book. Lama Tsongkhapa's lines of experience is a key to the connections and relationships between all the various spiritual texts. Verse 8, which I just read, presents how the teacher should teach and how the students should listen, so that both teaching and listening are successful and effective. It's very important that the teacher has the right motivation and attitude. If the teacher is motivated by mundane aspirations, such as wanting to be known as a great scholar, to attract money or other material offerings, or to bring people under his or her influence, then that teacher's motivation is certainly polluted. It's very important that a teacher's motivation for teaching be pure, altruistic aspiration, to be the pure altruistic aspiration to be of service and benefit to others. So, you know, that's one thing to look for when trying to establish a guru-disciple relationship. Of course, we can't really tell what others' motivations are, but we should, you know, use our best judgment. According to traditional Tibetan teachings, not only should a teacher ensure purity of motivation, but also the manner of giving the teaching should not be flawed. Teaching in a flawed way is likened to an old man eating. I can relate to that. An old man eating, he chews only the soft food and puts the hard bits aside. Similarly, teachers should not just focus on the simple points and leave out the difficult ones. It is also said that teachers should not teach Dharma like crows build nests. When crows build nests, there is no systematic order. It's totally chaotic. I don't know, I've never watched a crow build a nest. Does anybody? Similarly, Dharma teachers should not teach chaotically, but should offer a correct, systematic presentation that will benefit their students. So, you know, not that I really consider myself a Dharma teacher, but you know, I'm playing one on TV here. So that's why sometimes it's preferable to read some authentic teachings rather than, whatever comes in my head. Another quality that ideally a teacher should have is experiential knowledge of the topic being taught. If that is not possible, then the teacher should have some familiarity with the practice of that topic in order to be able to draw on personal experience. If that is not possible either, then at least the teacher should have a thorough intellectual understanding of the topic. As Dharmakirti said, there's no way that you can reveal to others that which is hidden to yourself. And His Holiness says, I have a friend who is a great teacher and a very learned Hindu master. One day we were talking about the issue of interreligious harmony and the need for greater communication among the different faiths. I remarked that I am completely ignorant on matters of Islam and don't have much contact with the Islamic world. He replied, well, it's not that difficult. Just learn to quote a few verses from the Quran and come up with some commentary here and there. That should be enough. You don't really have to know more. So that's an example of what not to do. A more serious example involves a German scholar who attended a discourse by a Tibetan teacher. During the discourse, he heard things that contradicted some of the basic teachings of the Buddha. So after the lecture, he went up to the teacher in person and told him that it seemed he'd made some mistakes. Instead of acknowledging these mistakes, the Tibetan teacher said, oh, it doesn't matter. You can say stuff like that. This is wrong. It's very important for teachers to be careful. When giving teachings from a throne, teachers' physical conduct is also very important. Before sitting down, the teachers should make 3 prostrations towards the throne. This is to remind them that teaching from a throne does not mean that they are being recognized as great or holy beings, but rather reflects the respect that is being accorded to the Dharma being taught. According to the Mahayana tradition, when the Buddha gave teachings on the perfection of wisdom, he himself made a throne to sit on in order to show respect for these sutras, which are considered to be the mother or source of all the Aryas, the noble beings, be they hearers, solitary realizers, or fully enlightened Buddhas. When the Buddhist sutras were compiled by the early Arhats and later by other followers of the Buddha, there were times when all the members of the congregation would remove their yellow outer robes. You see the chogu that the lamas wear usually when they're teaching, the yellow robe, the chogu. The congregation would remove their outer yellow robes. The person supervising the compilation process would fold and stack them up to make a throne and then sit on this throne of robes and compile the sutras. All this shows the tremendous respect accorded the Dharma. Once the Lama has sat down on the throne, the Tibetan custom is for him to recite a sutra reflecting on impermanence, to keep his motivation pure and prevent pride or conceit from arising in his mind. Such practices are important in ensuring purity on the teacher's part, because when you're sitting on a high throne and people start praising you, there's a real danger of pride and arrogance taking over. So when Lama Yeshe taught, in particular, I remember he, of course, before getting up on the throne, like most of the lamas, he'd do 3 prostrations. And then when he got on the throne, he would quite obviously snap his fingers. And that was his way of remembering impermanence, or showing us that to remember impermanence. That, in the scheme of things, this life is as long as a finger snap. And sometimes when the lamas sit down, then they'll recite a verse in Tibetan to remind themselves of impermanence. Therefore, we should take to heart the instructions of the Tibetan master, Dom Tomba. So, he was Atisha's main disciple and his interpreter and the actual founder of the Kadampa tradition that began with the teachings of Atisha, Dom Tomba, who said, even if the whole world venerates you by placing you on the crown of their head, always sit as low as possible and maintain humility. In the Precious Garland, so we were talking about that last time in this book, for example, Buddhist Advice for Living in Liberation, Jeffrey Hopkins, Snowline. In that book, Nagarjuna makes aspirational prayers to be like the elements of the earth, water, fire, and wind, which can be enjoyed and utilized by sentient beings. So if you take such sentiments seriously, you will never think that you are better than others or try to bring them under your control. One time when Lama Yeshe was giving teachings to his monks and nuns, called the International IMI, the International Mahayana Institute, he said that he thinks that the monks and nuns, and I think by extension, the rest of us Dharma students, should have a mantra that recite, every day we should recite one mala, I'm a servant of all sentient beings. 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 That should be our mantra. So this is what His Holiness is saying here and what Nagarjuna is saying in that book. It's also very important to have pure motivation when you receive teachings to ensure that you have three qualities of the ideal student: an objective mind, intelligence, and a deep interest in the teachings. So is that us? Are our minds objective? Are we intelligent? Do we have a deep interest in the teachings? So we should have those three qualities and cultivate the appropriate attitude. In this way, you'll become a suitable recipient of the teachings. You should regard the Dharma as a mirror and the actions of your body, speech, and mind as what the mirror reflects. Constantly examine what you see in the mirror of Dharma and continually try to modify your behavior. I'm just thinking how little I do that, and how difficult it can be, because our attachment wants to do this, our attachment wants to do that, and we know that if we stop and reflect and look in the mirror of the Dharma, that why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? And make it, and make a wisdom decision that we really shouldn't be. Attachment doesn't like that. So attachment often won't let us really look at what we're doing. I find anyway. But that's the Dharma practice. Always trying to defeat what Rinpoche called the evil thought of the 8 worldly dharmas. So I just don't have it right here, but there's a book called, How to Practice Dharma, which is Lama Zopa Rinpoche's extensive teachings on the 8 worldly dharmas. So that's really, that book really clearly delineates the border between Dharma and non-Dharma. One feature of the Buddha's teaching is that the greater the diversity of your resources and avenues of contemplation, the more effective will be your understanding and experience, and the deeper the conviction you acquire. Therefore, you must ensure that your approach to your practice is comprehensive and that your learning and understanding are vast. So, these days it's so much easier for us, who don't read Tibetan, to study quite widely. There's so much now available, so many important texts and oral teachings and so forth that we can listen to and read. That, even if we started reading now, we could, even if we lived another 50 years, we couldn't read everything that's available in English. Don't want to read everything, but authentic stuff. And there's more amazing teachings and books coming out, almost every week, it seems. So it's just so, for many people, this is a really bad time. This is a terrible time. You can look around the world and see, but for us, this may be one of the best times ever that we have so many Dharma teachings we can study, and so many learned teachers with whom we can study. So even though there are terrible things happening all over the world, we have the Dharma to rely on. And so from that point of view, we're extremely fortunate. At the same time, so comprehensive learning and understanding are vast. At the same time, you must also ensure that the things you learn do not remain merely at the intellectual level. Right from the start, your studies should be directed towards the objective of practice. If you study without the desire to relate what you are learning to your own life through practice, you run the risk of becoming hardened or apathetic. The great Kadampa masters used to say, if the gap between the Dharma and your mind is so big that a person can walk through it, your practice has not been successful. Make sure that there's not the slightest gap between the teachings and your mind. So there's this prayer, to make my mind one with the Dharma. It's, I think in the short Lam Rim by Losang Jimpa, that's in Lama Zopa Rinpoche's method to transform suffering life into happiness and enlightenment. I can't remember exactly how it goes, shamefully, but Anyway, we can look it up. To make my mind one with the Dharma. The Tibetan expression says that you can soften leather by kneading it with butter. But if that leather is hard because it's been used to store butter, you can never soften it, no matter how hard you try. Since you don't store butter in skinned containers in the West, perhaps that saying doesn't make sense, but you get the idea. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to call it being a Dharma thick skull. That, you know, we've you know, someone like me who's been around the Dharma and teachings for nearly 50 years, we've heard so many teachings and sort of take it so much for granted that it kind of doesn't penetrate the skull. It just kind of bounces off like water off a duck's back, you know, and, you know, one can become very complacent. So, you know, yak butter is, actually it's a misnomer because yak is a male animal and male animals don't produce milk. The female is a G, I think, or a zo. I can't even remember that. So anyway, yak butter. So Tibetans use it for making Tibetan tea and mixing with sampa and all things, different things like that. When the butter, and they use it in butter lamps, obviously, when it's rancid, it's used for softening leather. So they rub it into hides to make them more malleable to make clothes or whatever out of it. And the containers that they used to keep the butter in were sort of like these leather pouches. So after butter's been stored in the leather pouch for some time, it just permeates the leather. So the leather actually becomes extremely hard. So even though butter is used to soften leather, if the container in which it's stored after a while is permeated by the butter, it becomes very hard. So that's like if we're sort of too much in contact with the Dharma, with the wrong attitude, then we become sort of a little impervious to the actual meaning of the teachings. That's the Dharma thick skull.
Nick, another question.
Yeah.
So what's the antidote to that? Not studying Dharma, giving, you know, taking a vacation? You know, how do you deal with that?
Well, what His Holiness is saying, you must ensure the things you learn do not remain merely at the intellectual level, but that you put them into practice. If putting them into practice, that's not going to happen because you're experiencing the benefit of the Dharma and, you know, you want to learn more and you want to progress on the path. So, but, you know, if you're just studying to, I don't know, become a geshe and then have a certain position in the monastery and then have your own students and, you know, get a bit of have a good reputation. And if that's your motivation, then that's an example of the wrong attitude of the Dharma sort of hardening you. But if we, you know, and that's why Lama Zopa always recommends when we're reading a Dharma book, don't read it from cover to cover and then put it aside, say, okay, now I know that was the next one, and then read that one and then put that aside. But, you know, go through the book. When you're reading a Dharma book, read it very slowly. Stop after every one or two sentences and think, or after every paragraph, and try to think of the meaning and then use that as a mirror for your mind, you know. Is what's going on in your mind, does what's going on in your mind accord with that teaching or not? And if it does, you can rejoice and move on, perhaps. If it doesn't, then you need to see where the fault lies and try to correct that. I think that's the idea. The Kadamba masters also used to say that the water of Dharma can moisten the earnest, fresh mind of beginners, no matter how undisciplined they are, but can never penetrate the minds of those hardened by knowledge. So it's true, you know, for me, you know, when I first came in contact with the Dharma, like I said, nearly 50 years ago now, and sort of, it was a whole new world. It was just like unbelievable. There was this way of understanding life and the world that was, you know, completely new, and everything. And every time we heard a teaching, it was somehow seemed fresh and new, because we hadn't heard it before, you know. And then after studying mainly Lam Rim for 2 or 3 years in Nepal at Kopan, then we were forced to leave Nepal because the government changed the visa laws so that you could only stay for 3 months, and you had to change, you know, $100 a month, I think it was, in the bank, you know, not on the black market, and you had to show receipts, and it was much harder for people. You know, we've been staying there for years, getting 6-month visas, 12-month visas, and you know, no money changing requirements or anything like that. It was very easy. And so we had a really nice Dharma community at Kopan. We had about 15, 20 monks and nuns there. And, you know, we tried to have the home ministry give us an exception because we were serious Dharma students living in a monastery, monks and nuns living in a monastery, but they wouldn't. Even though we were Westerners, they wouldn't change the rules. So we had to leave, went to India. So we went to Dharamsala, most of us. And there we got teachings and initiations from His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche and His Holiness Serkong Rinpoche, Serkong Tsenshab Rinpoche, and Ling Rinpoche, and Geshe Ngawang Dage. And not only we got these highest Yoga Tantra initiations, but we also got commentaries. And so again, the first time we received these in-depth commentaries on these advanced tantric practices, it was again another whole new world, you know, but it was a whole new world that showed how important the Lam Rim was in the practice of Tantra, and how, you know, and I felt quite grateful in a way that I'd had this 2 or 3 years exposure, many teachings on the Lam Rim from Lam Zopa Rinpoche over those years. And, you know, I felt very grateful that I'd received those before receiving these tantric teachings. It was just showed how integrated Lam Rim and the practice of Vajrayana are. But now it's like, you know, the Dharma thick skull. It doesn't have this kind of fresh and exciting feel somehow. Except, you know, when I see these amazing books coming out, you know, like the, you know, like the middle length Lam Rim, for example, and, you know, Pabonka Rinpoche's commentary on the middle length Lam Rim. And I think, wow, that's so amazing. I really have to read those books. It's about as close as I get. Anyway, don't be like me, and don't be a Dharma thick skull, but have the earnest, you know, beginner's mind. The water of Dharma can moisten the earnest, fresh minds of beginners, no matter how undisciplined they are, but can never penetrate the minds of those hardened by knowledge. Therefore, learning and knowledge must never override your enthusiasm for practice, but neither should your dedication to practice interfere with your commitment to study. Furthermore, both your knowledge and dedication to practice must be grounded in a warm, compassionate heart. These three qualities, scholarship, dedication to practice, and compassion, should be combined. Scholarship, dedication to practice, and compassion. So look in the mirror, you know. How's my scholarship? All the books are on the shelf. How's my dedication to practice? How's my compassion? So probably we have a bit to work on, you know, even just looking at those three factors. If teachers and students prepare their minds as above, students can experience transformation even while listening to the teachings. So there's that famous story that lamas tell, you've probably heard it, when Lama Tsongkhapa was giving teachings on emptiness. So again, when listening to teachings, Rinpoche says that when we listen to teachings, we should be using it as an analytical meditation. Again, using those teachings that are being given, even as we're sitting there, using those teachings as a mirror for our mind. Do we see ourselves reflected in the teachings or not? Also, Rinpoche says, when you see the monks debating in the monasteries, that debating is also a kind of form of analytical meditation, where the monks are helping each other develop their understanding and root out the wrong conceptions. And like that, you know. So when listening to teachings, so Lama Tsongkhapa was giving a teaching on emptiness, and how the real I that we feel is totally non-existent. The I as we experience and believe it doesn't exist. And then all of a sudden, I think one of the monks listening to the teaching must have felt his I disappear, his ego disappear, and he grabbed his monk's shirt like this, to reassure himself he was still there. And Lama Tsongkhapa said, see that the Geshe-la there has found his eye. He's found his eye on his lapel. So that's an example of having an experience while listening to teaching. We should be so lucky. Finally, at the end of each session, both the student and the teacher should dedicate their merit to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. So we do that. In the Tibetan tradition, there are two main ways in which a teaching session can be conducted. In one, the primary objective is to help students gain a clearer understanding of the various philosophical points of the Dharma. In the other, the main emphasis is on specific aspects of the individual's practice, where specific problems encountered in meditation are addressed. Broadly speaking, when great treatises such as the 5 major works by Indian masters dealing with middle way philosophy are taught, the primary objective is to help students gain deeper understanding and clarity. However, when texts such as Lamrim are taught, more emphasis is placed on the practical application of specific meditation practices, and instructions are given on a step-by-step basis. There's also a unique style of teaching known as experiential commentary, where the teacher teaches one specific topic at a time. The student then practices this topic for a prolonged period of time, and only when the student has had some experience will the teacher take him or her to the next step. In this way, the teacher guides the students through an experiential understanding of the subject matter. So you could see how this would work in a monastery, where, the students and the teachers live together for years. So, the teacher might give the students teachings on perfect human rebirth, which even within that topic, there are so many sections. There's, the 8 freedoms. Each of the 8 is a meditation to be understood and experienced. The 10 richnesses, each of which is a meditation to be understood and experienced. And then the great usefulness or the meaningfulness of the perfect human rebirth, how it's useful, to gain temporal objectives, how it's useful to attain ultimate objectives, how it's useful in every moment, every fraction of a second can be transformed into the cause of enlightenment by bodhicitta. And then the examples, of the blind turtle and, throwing rice against a mirror, and the numbers, how few humans are compared to animals and insects and so forth. So there's all these different little teachings within the teaching on the perfect human rebirth. Each one is to be studied and meditated on and understood or realized. So the teacher would give these teachings and then send the students away to meditate on them. And then, after a few days or a week or whatever, how long it is, the student would come back and report to the teacher on their experience of doing that meditation. So if the student had an experience considered deep enough by the teacher, then the teacher would give, this Lamrim is in the right order, so then would give the next teaching, next topic to meditate on, and then the student would go away. And so gradually, the student would receive the next teachings that the student was ready for, according to the meditation and understanding of the previous topics. So, this could go on for years, just even on the perfect human rebirth, maybe, So like that through the whole Lamrim. So along with getting those studies and teachings, the student would also have to be doing stuff to purify and create merit, purify the mind and create merit. So it'd be maybe working around the monastery. They might have some jobs, serving the other monks, serving their teachers, and doing, you know, prostrations and, you know, mandala offerings and prostrations to the 35 Buddhas and so forth. So there'd be all these other practices, both formal practices and then service kind of practices to the monastery and the teachers. So it was a very rich life, you know, and creating the conditions for their meditation on the topic, the seed of the realization, to actually ripen into the realization. So that's what His Holiness is saying. The student would then practice the topic for a prolonged period of time, you know, prolonged depending on the student. And only when the student has some experience will the teacher take him or her to the next step. So in this way, the teacher guides the student through an experiential understanding of the subject matter. So even if we don't have a teacher to guide us personally in that way, you know, step by step, we can sort of do it ourselves to a certain extent, because we have so many books and teachings and commentaries on these various teachings. And, the very first teaching, Root of the Path, is Guru Devotion. And so we have Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, The Heart of the Path, very extensive teaching on Guru Devotion. So right there, you know, we can study and meditate on that book for years, really, before we have any, what we might call realization, you know. And then the next topic would be, the perfect human rebirth. So again, we have quite an extensive commentary by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and we have all these other texts that explain the perfect human rebirth, and with greater or lesser commentaries on them by, Pabonka Rinpoche and Lama Tsongkhapa and, Geshe Zopa Rinpoche in his amazing 5-volume commentary on the Lam Rim Chenmo, the great Lam Rim, called Steps of the Path. You know, I'm sure you're all familiar with those 5 volumes published by Wisdom. So, you know, there's just so much we can do just at the very beginning of the Lam Rim to try to take our practice from intellectual understanding to experiential understanding. But again, it's important to not just to study and meditate on the text, but to do these ancillary practices that kind of, prepare our mind, sort of, purify, clear and enrich our mind for getting realizations of these teachings. Dom Tomba, Lama's disciple, Lama Atisha's disciple, summarized the ideal qualities of a Mahayana teacher. Profound resources of knowledge in all aspects of the Dharma, being able to draw on both Sutra and Tantra and explain the relationship between various ideas from different philosophical perspectives, the ability to see what is most effective for an individual student at any particular time, and the ability to recognize the particular approach most suited to a given individual. So not easy to find a teacher that fits that description. Profound resources of knowledge in all aspects of the Dharma. Being able to draw on both Sutra and Tantra to explain the relationship between various ideas from different philosophical perspectives. So, you know, there's these 4 schools of Buddhist philosophy, Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, Madhyamaka. So knowing all the details of those different schools, knowing Sutra and Tantra, and having the ability to see what's most effective for an individual student, you know, at any particular time. So really be able to not necessarily read the student's mind, but understand what level each student is at, you know, and so to give teachings appropriate to that student. And the ability to recognize a particular approach most suitable to a given individual. So there's that long story in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand about the small path, the Chuddapintaka, where, you know, the student was so dumb that all, you know, when he learned, was given 2 syllables to learn. When he learned the first syllable, he'd forgotten the second one. When he remembered the second one, he'd forgotten the first one. So how the Buddha had him, you know, clean the shoes of the monks to start with, and then to sweep the temple, and then by reciting, you know, Dulpang Dimapang, you know, abandon dirt, abandon stains, and then through that practice and that recitation, he realized emptiness. I mean, so to know the different ways of treating different students to bring them to realization. So, you know, it's not easy to be a Dharma teacher, and not easy to find a teacher qualified in these ways. Not easy, but there are. And again, this is why we're fortunate. There are such teachers from, you know, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and to the different Geshis who've gone through this extensive, you know, years of study on these particular topics. So, you know, we are fortunate. But we're a tiny minority of the world. You know, we and people like us are a tiny minority of the world's population. So we should know really how fortunate we are, and not lose this chance. So the next verse in Lama Tsongkhapa's Lines of Experience. So I'm just going to do these couple of verses from Lines of Experience. I'm not going to, maybe another time we could study that text, but here it says, having taken refuge, you should see that the root cause, excellently propitious for as great a mass of good fortune as possible for this and future lives, is proper devotion in thought and action to your sublime teacher, who shows you the path to enlightenment. Thus, you should please your teacher by offering your practice of exactly what he or she says. which you would not forsake even at the cost of your life. I, the yogi, have practiced just that. So that's Lama Tsongkhapa calling himself a yogi and says that that's how he's practiced, serving his guru. You who also seek liberation, please cultivate yourself in the same way. So, from then on, most of the verses in Lines of Experience finish the same way, that this is what I have done, Lama Tsongkhapa, I have done. So please, you who also seek liberation, do the same. So from this verse on, the main topic is the actual manner in which students are guided through the stages of the path. This is broadly divided into two sections. So again, this text of Lama Tsongkhapa is based on Atisha's lamp, which is what we're going to get to eventually. Well, we did the first verse already. Guided through the stage of the path. This is broadly divided into two sections. One is how to rely on the spiritual teacher, who is the foundation or the root of the path. The other is, having done that, having learned how to rely on the spiritual teacher, is how to engage in the actual practice of the stages of the path. So with respect to the former, relying on the teacher, this verse explains the practice of proper reliance on a spiritual teacher. In Sanskrit, it's called Kalyana Mitra, or in Tibetan, Gewe Shenyen, which literally translates as a spiritual friend, virtuous friend. Just as there can be negative friends and spiritual friends, there can be both negative teachers and spiritual teachers. With respect to ordinary worldly knowledge, although in the final analysis, what we learn comes through our own study and maturity of understanding, still, at the beginning, we need someone to introduce us to the subject matter and guide us through it. Similarly, when it comes to spiritual transformation, although true experiences come through our own development of knowledge and practice, we again need an experienced teacher to show us the path. So it's like His Holiness was saying when he was talking about the experiential understanding. We need a teacher gives us teachings and tells us how to meditate on that teaching and sends us a way to do it. And then we do the meditation and the ancillary practices. And then we have some kind of experience and we report back. So then if we've gone wrong, the teacher will tell us where we've gone wrong and send us away to do it again till we get it right. Or we'll say, good, okay, so now you're ready for the next step. So, we need a teacher like that. Since the spiritual teacher is so crucial to our practice, Lama Tsongkhapa goes into great detail in his great exposition of the stages of the path, the Lamrim Chemo, presenting the topic in three broad categories: the qualifications of the spiritual teacher, the qualities required by the student, and the proper teacher-student relationship. So that's in the great exposition of the stages of the path, and Lama and Geshe Sopa gives teachings on that in his Steps of the Path commentaries. And also Pabonka Rinpoche elaborates on that teaching in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. And then Lama Zopa Rinpoche greatly elaborates on that framework in his Heart of the Path. So, this, as Lama Tsongkhapa describes the relationship with the spiritual teacher as the root of the path. So just as it's important for a tree or a plant, to have a healthy root, if plants don't have a healthy root, the whole rest of the plant is unhealthy. Bad trunk, bad branches, bad leaves, bad fruit, bad flowers, or maybe none. So for our spiritual practice to bear proper fruit, it needs to have a healthy root. And that healthy root is the proper relationship with our spiritual teacher. So although that's dealt with extensively in the Heart of the Path, His Holiness deals with it relatively briefly here. So this is also worth going through, since this isn't, explicitly dealt with in Atisha's text. The qualities of the spiritual teacher. So the qualifications of a suitable teacher can be found in texts from the Vinaya on the teachings on monastic discipline, all the way up to the Vajrayana. Since here we're discussing Mahayana teachings in general, we'll consider the 10 qualifications of a teacher as presented in Maitreya's ornament of the Mahayana Sutras, Mahayana Sutra Lankara. So the 10 qualities are a disciplined mind, referring to the quality of having mastered the higher training in ethical discipline. A calm mind, referring to the quality of having mastered the higher training in meditation and concentration. A mind that is thoroughly calmed, referring to the quality of having mastered the higher training in wisdom, particularly the wisdom of no self. So those three first qualities refer to the three higher trainings we often hear about: higher training in conduct, higher trainings in conduct, concentration, and wisdom. So, these are the trainings and practices required to attain liberation from cyclic existence, the small enlightenment, sometimes called. So fourth, knowledge exceeding that of the students in whatever subject is being taught. 5, energy and enthusiasm for teaching the student. 6, vast learning in order to have the resources from which to draw examples and citations. 7, realization of emptiness, if possible, a genuine realization of emptiness, but at least a strong commitment to the practice of emptiness on the basis of deep admiration for the teachings on it. So this is similar to number 3. Mind that is thoroughly calmed through having mastered the higher training in wisdom, the wisdom of no self. So realization of emptiness, this is broader, I think we'll come to it. If not a genuine realization of emptiness, at least a strong commitment to the practice of emptiness on the basis of deep admiration for the teachings on it. So I think it was Aryadeva, sort of Nagarjuna's main disciple, who wrote the 400 stanzas, which is another important text. He said something like, even having a doubt that there's such a thing as emptiness rips samsara to shreds. So even thinking, this emptiness, teachings on emptiness, it's kind of interesting, but not sure if there's, not sure if it's, those teachings are really explain the way things are or not. You know? So even just having that doubt is the beginning of the crumbling of our samsara. So then I think Chandrakirti said, those who doubt powerfully have the potential to attain liberation, but only if they investigate their doubts. So while having a doubt about, the validity of the teachings on emptiness apparently is enough to tear samsara to shreds, we need to investigate that doubt and obviously come to the conclusion that the teachings on emptiness are correct and, the way we should go. At least a strong commitment to the practice of emptiness on the basis of deep admiration for the teachings on it. So eighth is eloquence and skill in presenting the Dharma so that the teaching is effective. Deep compassion and concern for the well-being of the student to whom the teaching is given. So perhaps that's the most important quality of all. The teacher has, a deep compassion for us, the students, and, a deep concern for our well-being. I think not only for our ability to receive teachings, but also our general situation, so that we have, the leisure, if that's the right word, to study and practice, rather than having to be preoccupied, from morning to night with all the worldly affairs of work and family and, health and, finances and all these different worldly issues that tend to beset us. So teachers has deep concern that where our material needs are taken care of, so that we have time and space for study and practice. And finally, the resilience to maintain enthusiasm for and commitment to the student, not becoming discouraged no matter how many times the teaching has to be repeated. So, a lot of patience for us, Dharma thick skulls who've had decades of teachings, but still have completely undisciplined, unruly minds, and who don't live in accord with the teachings. They don't give up on us. They have compassion and understanding and the perseverance to keep giving us even the same teaching again and again. So those are the 10 basic qualities of a Dharma teacher, as explained by Maitreya in the Mahayana Sutra Lamkara. So the first three qualities relate to the practice and experience of the three higher trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom. The other important qualities are having realization of emptiness as the ultimate nature of reality and compassion for the student. Those who assume the role of teacher must ensure that these qualities are present within themselves. When discussing these 10 qualities in his great exposition of the stages of the path, Lama Tsongkhapa makes a very important point. He says that if your own mind is not disciplined, there's no way you can discipline the mind of another. I'm just oh, sorry. Just gives the page reference. I thought I was going to say something profound about that. There's a footnote. Therefore, if you want to be a teacher, you must first seek to discipline your own mind. He goes on to say that the way prospective teachers should discipline their minds is through the practice of these 3 higher trainings, morality, concentration, and wisdom. Furthermore, teachers should not be limited to teaching just 1 or 2 points of Dharma, but should be able to present particular practices with complete knowledge of their place within the overall framework of the Buddha's teaching. Lama Tsongkhapa concludes this section of his great exposition by emphasizing that practitioners seeking a spiritual teacher should familiarize themselves with these 10 qualities and then look for them in those in whom they would entrust their spiritual welfare. When choosing a spiritual teacher from the start, examine the person you have in mind to see if he or she really possesses these qualities. If you do so, you'll reduce the risk of encountering serious problems later on. Otherwise, you may use the wrong criteria to judge a teacher's suitability. This used to happen in Tibet. Tibetans have tremendous faith in the Dharma, but their level of knowledge was not always equal to their devotion. Instead of assessing spiritual teachers by their inner qualities, people would base their judgment on external manifestations, such as the number of horses in the Lama's entourage. I don't know too many teachers with horses. Rajneesh had 46 Rolls Royces at one point, so I think that maybe influenced a number of people. This guy's got 46 Rolls Royces. He must be the real deal, Well, we saw what happened there. If a Lama was traveling, we're talking about Tibet now, of course. If a Lama was traveling in a large convoy, people would say, oh, he must be a very high Lama. People like that also tended to regard what the Lama was wearing, a unique hat, brocade robes, and so forth, as an indicator of his spiritual greatness. In 19 in January 1975, Yangtze Rinpoche, who had been recognized as the incarnation of a great Tibetan Geshe, Geshe Ngawang Gendun, who'd actually been the teacher of Lama Yeshe in Tibet, and also Lama Yeshe's friend, Champa Tinley, who was Yangtze Rinpoche's father. They'd been at Sera together. But Jhampa Tinley had disrobed to, I think, try to fight the Chinese in 59, and then he escaped to Nepal, and then he married and had many children, 7 or 8, including Yangtze Rinpoche and Sister Tsenla, who's, I think she may be director of Root Institute in Bodh Gaya now. She's a very competent translator. And one of the other sons became a monk. He was ordained by Song Rinpoche in 74, along with Sangye Kadro, Kathleen MacDonald, and Steve Pearl, and can't remember his name. Anyway, so he disrobed, and so did Steve. Sangye Kadro is still a nun. She's the author of How to Meditate. So at his enthronement, Yangtze Rinpoche's enthronement at Kopan, there was this big ceremony, and the whole Jhampa Tinley's whole family came, and you can read all about it in The Big Love, the Lama Yeshe biography. But Lama Zopa Rinpoche, as sort of the High Lama, the incarnate Lama of Kopan, he had to sit on the main throne, and they gave him these incredible brocade robes. And I've never seen Rinpoche look so unhappy. He made to sit up there on top of these really ornate robes, this ornate donka, you know, the Tibetan shirt thing that monks wear. And never seen him wear it again, actually. There's my projection, but you can see the pictures. He's not kind of smiling as he usually is. Anyway, it's another story, but I won't go off on that tangent right now. So people did what he was wearing as an indicator of spiritual greatness. It's said that when Atisha first came to Tibet, his translator, Nautsa Lotsawa, and the Ngari king from Western Tibet, Changchubur, sent letters inviting all high Tibetan lamas to come and receive this great Indian master. So Changchubur, you know, Atisha praises him in the first verse of Lamp for the Path. They sent letters inviting all the high Tibetan lamas to come and receive this great Indian master. This is in Western Tibet. A large procession of Tibetan lamas, came to meet Atisha, and as they rode up on horseback, they could be seen from quite a distance. They were all dressed in very impressive looking costumes with elaborate headgear shaped into fantastic designs, such as crow's heads. When Atisha saw them, he covered his head with his shawl in mock terror and exclaimed, "Oh my, the Tibetan ghosts are coming." When the lamas dismounted, they removed their brocade and costumes until they were wearing just their monastic robes and walked towards Atisha, who then became very pleased. There's a nice story about that in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. And I can't quite remember it, so I won't try to describe it now. On this subject, we can also look at the life of Milarepa, who shines as one of the crown jewels among the Tibetan meditators. One day, the Lama Naro Bönchung, who'd heard of Milarepa's great reputation, went to visit him. When he met Milarepa in person, however, he was taken completely by surprise. he was taken completely by surprise and later remarked to someone, "This Milarepa is so famous, but when you actually see him, he looks just like a beggar." So basically, he roamed naked in the high mountains, in the freezing cold. And because it was so cold, his body was kind of blue and skinny, and he looked more scary than inspiring to the casual observer. This reminds me of the humility of another great Lama, the Kadampa master, Domtomba. So, Atisha's translator. The story goes that once when Domtomba was traveling from one place to another, he met a Tibetan monk who'd been walking for some time. This monk was very tired and his boots had begun to hurt his feet, so he took them off. And since Domtomba looked just like a humble layman, he asked him to carry his boots. So Domtomba took the heavy boots on his back without question. Later, as they approached a monastery, the monk noticed that all the monks were lined up on both sides of the road, obviously waiting to receive somebody. He thought to himself, "They didn't know I was coming, and anyway, this reception could not possibly be for me." So he turned to Domtomba and said, "This welcome is obviously someone important. Do you have any idea who it's for?" Domtomba replied, it could be for me." The monk looked at him in astonishment and, realizing what he'd done, ran off, leaving his boots behind. There's also a much more recent example. Around the turn of the century, there was a great meditation master and teacher named Dza Patrul Rinpoche. So he wrote this famous book. Where is it? Not right here. Words of my spiritual master. Words of my perfect teacher. Dza Patrul, who was a great bodhisattva and embodied the teachings of Shantideva's text to guide the bodhisattva's way of life. Dza Patrul Rinpoche had many disciples, but often led the life of a wandering practitioner. Whenever he settled in one area, he would begin to attract disciples and particular patrons. After a while, he would find it all too much and go elsewhere to seek solitude. One of those times, Dza Patrul Rinpoche sought shelter in the home of an old lady and started doing household chores while pursuing his spiritual practice. One day, as he was outside emptying the lady's chamber pot, some lamas stopped by the house. They told the old lady that they'd heard their teacher might be residing somewhere in the region and asked if she had seen him. She asked what he looked like, and as they started to describe his general appearance, the kind of clothes he wore and so forth, she suddenly realized that the person who was outside emptying her pot was the great Dza Patrul Rinpoche. She was so embarrassed that, just like the monk in the previous story, she too ran off. I heard this story from the great Kunu Lama, Tenzin Gyaltsen. So, we went through his biography at the beginning of this series because we're supposed to be relating Atisha's text to, we're supposed to be going through The Lamp for the Path according to Kunu Lama's commentary. So we did a brief biography of Kunu Lama Rinpoche. And he studied with all 4 Tibetan traditions. He studied with Sanskrit scholars. He studied in Tibet. He studied in India. He studied all over the place. And he had extremely vast knowledge, just as His Holiness describes a spiritual teacher should have. And of course, he had such vast knowledge that His Holiness the Dalai Lama himself took him as a teacher. And he gave His Holiness Kunal Lama Rinpoche gave his holy teachings on Shantideva's guide. And so just as these stories are describing these great teachers who kind of took on this very humble, even beggar-like aspect, so Kunal Lama was like that. And the Tibetan people, you know, as even they saw him here or there, they thought he was nothing, you know, until he started giving teachings to His Holiness, and His Holiness took him as a guru, and then their attitude completely changed. The point of all this is that a true Mahayana teacher should be someone who enjoys simplicity, yearns to be anonymous, and, as Tibetans would say, hides in solitude like a wounded animal. So, you know, Lama Zopa Rinpoche was of that attitude. He was extremely humble. He hated wearing those brocades, you know. And in the early days when we first met him in the early 70s, you almost never saw him. He just stayed in his room meditating hours and hours and hours every day, and would come out to give teachings, but then go back to his room. And then Lama Yeshe was the person you saw out and about around the monastery. And, you know, what Rinpoche wanted to do was go to his original place in Laudo, you know, where he spent his previous life meditating in the cave, and where he was reborn up in that area. And he just wanted, he would prefer to just be up there meditating in his cave and not giving teachings and not having students like that. But, you know, Lama Yeshe was his teacher, and as an exemplary student of a Lama, he did what Lama told him to do. That was his offering of service to Lama. And one year, I can't, must have been 1979, I think. Often Rinpoche would go, sometimes with Lama Yeshe, would go to Laudo at Sakadawa to conduct the Nyungne, which was a bit of a tradition up in that area. And there was a nunnery nearby Laudo called Tamo Nunnery, just down the mountain. From Laudo was here and Tamo was down here, about 1,000 feet down. And the nuns would all come to Laudo for these Nyungnes. I think I did 2 or 3, 73, 74, and 77. Those are the 3 years I went to Laudo. And so in 1979, Lama Zopa Rinpoche was at Laudo doing for the Nyungne for Sakadawa. And then after that, the Lamas were supposed to do their world tour. So in 75, the Lamas did their first, in 74, the Lamas made their first trip to the West, to the States, Australia, New Zealand. And then in 75, they went all around the world. And then every year after that, continually, usually in the summer, they would go to, you know, America or Europe or Australia, different places. And the centres were starting, the FPMT was getting going, so centres would organise these teaching events and the Lamas would come and teach and so forth. And more centres would develop, and like that, sort of fairly organically, the organisation grew. So in 79, there was this schedule set out, and Lama Yeshe went somewhere first, I think. You have to read Big Love to find out. And Rinpoche was supposed to come down later. So when it came time for him to go on the world tour, he sent a note down to Kopan that said, I'm not going. I think I've checked that it's more beneficial for me to stay up here in retreat. So then all the people, you know, who were organising the tour, Peter Kedge and Jackie Keeley and probably Lama himself, kind of freaked out. Lama Zopa Rinpoche's not coming on the tour. Everything's set up. It's been advertised. Everything's been booked. The students have all paid their fees, you know, to go to the, I don't remember where it was supposed to go anyway. So, so then they sent, Jackie Keeley was in Copan, and I guess Peter Kedge was with Lama, wherever they were. And so they said to Jackie, you have to go and get him. So she rented a helicopter, and she took this helicopter to drag Lama Zopa Rinpoche kicking and screaming out of his cave onto the world tour. So at that point, the helicopters had to land at Mende, which is a little village, tiny little village, just down below Laudo. So Laudo was here, Mende was here, and then the nunnery was over there. And so you read the book to find out the whole story, but eventually Lama Zopa was persuaded to leave, and I think his mother and his sister were sort of hanging onto his robes, begging for him not to go as he was trying to climb onto this helicopter. It was a whole dramatic scene. But eventually he went, and he went there, and he flew to Kathmandu, and he went on the tour. So, you know, a true Mahayana teacher should be one who enjoys simplicity and hides in solitude, like in a cave, like a wounded animal. So it reminded me of that story. And, you know, that was the general vibe, that, you know, Rinpoche was this ascetic yogi who just wanted to meditate, and, you know, he had to be dragged around the world by Lama Yeshe to give these teachings, you know. That was the appearance. The Tibetan tradition states that Mahayana teachers should have at least two basic qualities. First, from the depths of their heart, they should regard the future life as more important than this. We should all have that quality. Without this, nothing one does becomes Dharma. Second, teachers should regard the welfare of others as more important than their own. So that's this, you know, ninth quality of having compassion for the student, concern for the deep compassion, concern for the well-being of the student. Without this, nothing one does, it becomes Mahayana. So without regarding the happiness and welfare of others more important than our own, nothing we do becomes a Mahayana practice. So I think that's probably it for today. You know, I don't know about you, but it is for me. So next time we come to the qualities of the student. So we definitely need to bring our mirror to that one. Okay, so thank you very much. I hope this format is okay, reading these teachings from the actual teachers and then going off on tangents here and there. So we generated bodhicitta at the beginning. We've been reading the words of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, so, you know, huge amount of merit. You know, we've created, we can't see it, we can't feel it, we can't hear it, but, you know, we have the understanding faith that it's there. So we need to, this huge mountain of merit, so we need to dedicate that to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. So we think, you know, because of this merit, may I quickly reach enlightenment for the sole purpose of leading all sentient beings to enlightenment. you know, and we dedicate the merit to the long life and good health of our teachers, and to the infinite spread of the Dharma throughout the infinite universe, and to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. So that's the essence of these prayers that we do to formalize that. Jennifer?
Quick. Saji Perki Junshi Mi Taksha Rirab Lingshini De Genpadi Sange Jingdu Mi Te Uagi Roku Namda Jingna Chirpasho Idam Guru Ramandala Kanya Tayani Kari Rawe Kowe Zinkam Dear Pendang Dewa Mother Joe Ne Chenre Zigwang Tenzin Gyatso Yi Dape Sete Badu Tengyur Chi. You who uphold the subduers more away, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjuna's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior, myself, and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Through this virtue may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state. Precious Supreme Bodhi mind, may it where unborn arise, and where born never decline, but increase forevermore. Nid me tse wei te chen chen reizig, dream a ken pe wang po jam pe yang, gang chen ke pe son gen son ka pa, lo zon dra pe shab la so wa de.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Stay well, have a great day, great week, and hope to see you next Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Dr. Nick. Thank you.